Welcome back, everybody, to Play Like a Jet Live, brought to you by U Stadium. I'm Luke Grant. We've got Clay back with us after he was away last week. And we've got a special guest, George Bremer, joining us from the Herald Bulletin, covers the Indianapolis Colts and everything in that aspect. The Jets seem to make a trade with every year. So, first of all, George, how you going, man?
Good. We're overdue for that trade this year. Should have happened in April. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, we're lagging behind, but there's still plenty of time to catch up as training camp kicks off. Clay, how you going? It's been a pretty quiet week, or a couple of weeks for the Jets. I guess the thing off the bat that we can discuss is the Marcus May deal or lack thereof. The Jets decided to let him play under the tag. The deadline's passed. What were your thoughts on Marcus May not being extended? And if you had any thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we've learned anything with Douglas and now with Salah on team, like they're not going to build the opposite way of how you're supposed to build a team. They want to build inside out. They're not going to shell out money to an older safety going into a second contract. Like they want to save that money for the offense and defensive lines and the quarterback position, like the more important positions. So the Jets have all the leverage in this. I don't think Marcus May really has much that he can do to change their opinion on like what he should get. Granted, and Marcus May, he's the type of player you want on your team. He's a captain. He's gone through the crazy eye era. He's gone through Todd Bowles. Like he's been there for all that. He went through the Jamal Adams saga when people were just like kind of bashing his teammate and like probably one of his good friends. So I like the fact that fans want him here, but you can't give out a big contract to a safety. Like he's going to be 30 years old in a couple of years. And we all know, like, defensive backs, they kind of fall off a cliff once they hit that 30-year-old mark. So I don't really have a big issue. You can tag him this year and next year as long as he's okay he's still making great money. Let's not get that misconstrued. He's still making great money. So if he's okay making that money for the next 2 years, I'm all for it. But I know the guy wants to kind of lock in his security for the next 3-4 years rather than going year by year.
George, as someone who works with the Colts, they do such an excellent job of retaining the guys in their building, and they really build from within and extend the guys in the draft. Being around the team so often and the culture in the locker room, how important is giving guys that you've drafted, that second contract? And do you think maybe the Jets missed a beat here?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of Clay said. I think it's position by position as well. I mean, you got to take into account, all the cap hits and the future cap situation and, how important that is to your defense and all those sorts of things. But there's no doubt for Frank Reich and Chris Ballard, the number one goal is the locker room. And they worry about that more than they do anything else. And so they want to always be sending that message that if you do things the right way and you do what you're being asked, they're going to take care of you. They're going to reward you. And obviously, if they don't do that enough times, you're going to start losing that buy-in, and then it'll erode that base. But, it's happened. I mean, here, for instance, this offseason, there were people in the locker room that weren't happy to see Anthony Walker go. He was a leader. He was a coach on the field. But Bobby Okereke was drafted to replace him. It was sort of, not an open secret in a lot of ways that this is where it was headed. So it does happen. It's not like you don't deal with those bumps in the road. I think it's just – I think the most important thing isn't who you sign and who you re-sign. It's being consistent, the type of guys that you keep. Mm-hmm. When it starts kind of being all over the place, the players they're gonna turn on you.
Yeah, hopefully Joe Douglas can be consistent like the front office down in Indianapolis. That's what we want to see here. Clay, the second bit of news that we had in the last couple of days was Elijah Vera Tucker signing his contract. For some reason, everyone gets so worked up online about rookies signing their deals before camp. Everyone knows they're going to get done. It's just a matter of time. But this is the world we live in. He was probably your favorite player in the entire draft class, not to put words in your mouth, but must be pleased to see him signed before camp.
Yeah, I mean, it's always good. I understand the frustration, though, because, go back to obviously ended up working out. 2007, when we drafted Darrelle Revis, he was one of the last rookies. I think he was the last rookie to sign his contract, if I'm not mistaken. And you just want to see these young guys get into the building. Like Sam Darnold, he was another one that was pretty late in signing his contract. Who knows? Maybe if he had an extra 2 days at training camp, he would have been a stud. But no, but in all seriousness, it's good to see him under contract. He'll be in the building. I think they reported yesterday. So I'm glad to see it. Hopefully Zach Wilson and Elijah Moore can sign their contracts and just get this thing over with. Because the New York media, quite frankly, it sucks. Like they're on their player, they're on the players and the coaches. Like it's just unbearable sometimes. So we don't need the distractions. Hopefully they can just get the contract signed and just get to work and just turn this thing around.
All right. So what I wanted to do today, guys, is dive into the Jets offseason and some of their team building strategies that we've seen from Joe Douglas and co. The reason we've got George on, number one, he's so great at what he does covering the Colts, but also some of the parallels between the Jets and the Colts and that strategy. So what we've seen Joe Douglas implement very clearly is that he wants to build through the trenches. The defensive line with building on Quinnen Williams, who's already here, Carl Lawson, then you bring over Sheldon Rankins and John Franklin Myers. Really a good group there. And then on the offensive line, obviously drafting Elijah Vera Tucker, who we just mentioned, to play next to Mekhi Becton, bringing in Morgan Moses in free agency. So, George, I wanted to start with you. Do you think there are really clear parallels between the Ballard regime and that here in New York? And what do you think of that philosophy in the NFL today in the passing league? Do you think it's still the right way to attack team building?
Yeah, there's definitely parallels. I think in a lot of ways I watch what's going on there, and it's like kind of getting into a time machine 3-4 years ago here. It's a similar philosophy. The difference is right now you had the chance to bring in that young quarterback and build with him. And I think if there's one thing that you could give Chris Ballard, if you could give him a present anywhere in the football world, it would be that chance, to have that high pick and choose your quarterback. I think that's the most important thing still. I mean, I don't think I'm breaking any news here. I think that it changes everything else you do. I think here in Indy, one of the things that Ballard gets criticized for when he does is not going out and making that big move, not, signing a big free agent, not packaging picks and moving up. And I think when you have your quarterback, it's easier to do that, because until you have him, you've got to make everything else around him better. And I think until they know that Zach Wilson's the guy, you'll see Joe Douglas continue to build that way as well. You want 6 shots at the draft board because you want, 3 or 4 of them to work out. Once you've got that guy at quarterback, you figure he can help out a guy here. He can help out your receivers, for instance. He can help out your line in certain ways. You may be more willing to target one guy higher and not to go with quality over quantity once you have that quarterback in place. And I think it'll be interesting to see, because I think now is where those roads diverge, because the Colts are they're kind of piecing it together at that quarterback slot. It was kind of by necessity Jacoby Brissett for a year. They kind of got into a situation with the Phillip Rivers thing that the moon kind of aligned properly, and he was the guy for 1 year. And now it's Carson Wentz, and we'll see. Right now it's a 2-year experiment. We'll see if it goes beyond that. Obviously in New York, it's Zach Wilson's show. But I think building the way that Joe Douglas is building, I think the reason the Colts have been able to have relative success with Brissett and Rivers, and the reason they have some confidence about what's going to happen with Carson Wentz is that those other pieces are in place. I mean, the entire attitude of this franchise changed when Ballard put money into the offensive line. When he went out and got Quentin Nelson and put him between Ryan Kelly and Anthony Costanzo, it changed this franchise. And then DeForest Buckner did the same thing on the defensive side. All of a sudden, the defensive line was a problem for other people. When you have those things in place, it's just, to me, we always talk about fundamentals for a player. You've got to walk before you run. The line, to me, is the fundamentals for a football team. When you've got the trenches in place, everybody else's job gets easier.
Clay, obviously we've talked about the strategy that Joe Douglas has here. If you were building a team, would you rather be strong on the offensive line and the defensive line, or have elite corner and wide receiver play? Because this seems to be more of a discussion now in this analytical PFF era, where do you build the team backwards from the secondary? Is coverage more important than pass rush? All these discussions. So where's your thought process at with that?
Yeah, I'll actually get to that in 1 second. I do want to go back to what George said, and I think I obviously know the Colts a lot better than I do, but I think I can correct you on one thing. I think if Chris Ballard had the chance to get anything, I don't know if it would be a young quarterback. I think it would be a healthy Andrew Luck. I think one thing would be that.
I kind of purged that name from my lexicon for a while. That was a long couple of years.
Yeah, no, I definitely get that. But so going back to your question, Luke, personally, I still believe in building through the trenches. That's how you win football games. The game is controlled at the line of scrimmage. And I understand, like, yes, receivers, cornerbacks, running backs, those are sexy positions. Those are the guys that get people to the stadium. Those are the guys that sell jerseys. You don't often see a number like when we had Nick Mangold and DeBricker Shaw Ferguson, you didn't see 60 and 74. Maybe you saw 74 a little more because Nick Mangold was out there and he was different. But like you still saw Brandon Marshall jerseys. You saw Santonio Holmes and Thomas Jones and all those guys. But the way you win games is through the line of scrimmage. And George just nailed it on the head. It changed the direction of the Colts when they started building that offensive line. When they brought in Quentin Nelson and Braden Smith in the same draft, that completely changed the Colts offense. And then when you bring in a DeForest Buckner, a top, we'll call it a 5 interior defensive lineman in the league, that changed the projection of that defense. And I think, I don't care what year it is. You can go back to the 1980s, 2000, now. That's how you win football games. Obviously, you need a quarterback to do it, but in reality, you have to build in the trenches to actually have continued success.
And the Jets are hoping they'll get that boost from Carl Lawson and him taking Quinnen Williams to the next level. So let's talk a little bit about the free agent crop that the Jets brought in now, George. You talked off the bat about the Colts and sometimes Ballard getting some criticism about not bringing in the high big signing, the flashy guy in free agency and via trade. I think Joe Douglas has been a little similar. He went for those kind of second tier guys. Obviously, Carl Lawson and obviously Corey Davis are slightly higher than some of the names the Colts brought in. But what did you think of those Jets moves, kind of shopping in that second tier? And do you think that's also something similar to what Ballard's done, or he doesn't even spend that much money?
No, I mean, it's been similar to what he said. This year was a little different because they know that they've got Leonard and Smith coming up, and that's going to be their big free agent money for this season. And then obviously Quentin Nelson the year after that. So you've got a lot of your cap already kind of spoken for. And I know, too, I mean, Ballard spoke specifically. I don't know what the situation is with the Jets, but Ballard spoke specifically about the pandemic's impact on the salary cap and going forward to change kind of what they're looking at in that 3-year window. So I think this year he was ultra cheap. I mean, it was really surprising, how little they did for the cap room they had, even by his standards. I thought a couple of the guys that the Jets got were on my radar as potential targets for the Colts. Lawson in particular. I mean, if you look at the team here right now, if there's one area that you point to that's a real need still, I think it's that edge pass rush. They drafted a couple guys, which put a lot of faith in rookies here right now. I think bringing in somebody like Carl Lawson made a lot of sense. I think it was a really good move for the Jets because I think those, to me, it's great. Obviously, if you can go get Khalil Mack, you go get Khalil Mack if it works out. But I think if barring that obvious top 2 or 3 level kind of guy at his position, I would look more at the Carl Lawsons of the world. Here's a guy on the way up, and that's what's worked for the Colts. They've gone out, and when they brought in Danico Autry was actually the first signing that Ballard made, the first free agent. And the collective reaction here was who? But it didn't take long at all to kind of read, okay, he's a guy who was behind some people with the Raiders. He had some traits that work in this defense. He came in, wasn't a Pro Bowler. He wasn't, the biggest star on the field, but he did his job specifically, and he was worth the money they gave him. And I think when you're in that second tier kind of market, that's what you're looking for. I think Lawson's a step above that. I think he might be a Pro Bowler. We'll see how it turns out. But that's, to me, you build through the draft, right? Those are your stars. You get your leaders and the guys who are going to win games for you there, and then you supplement that with guys who are on the rise. And I think Joe Douglas has done a good job with that. You're paying for their future production, not for what they did already in the league.
Clay, I want to shift now to Corey Davis, the other kind of marquee signing the Jets made. Where was your initial reaction? Because it's been a couple of months now, if not longer than that, since the Jets brought him on. And how do you feel about him now? And do you think he's the most talented receiver on the Jets roster with Mims, Crowder, and Elijah Moore here?
I mean, we spoke about it. I loved it. Granted, I mean, he only did it. He only had one good year, and it was a contract year. So that always worries me a little bit. But he was a top 5 pick for a reason, granted, and maybe that was a little bit of a reach at the time, but he was still, we'll call it a top 10 pick for a reason. He was a good player. He always had traits. He kind of fit what the Jets needed. The Jets, outside of Denzel Mims, we didn't have any bigger bodies that can kind of win on the outside. So bringing in a guy like Corey Davis, who could be that X receiver for the Jets, I mean, I think it was a good signing. As for the most talented, honestly, I think it's going to be Elijah Moore. I don't know what it is. I just have a gut feeling about this kid. Just the way he presents himself, the way obviously what he does on the football field, and maybe I'm saying this with my Jets fan glasses on, but I don't think I've felt this way about a Jets young receiver in a while. Even Denzel Mims, I loved him, but I always had in my mind like, all right, like yeah, we'll see how it pans out. Like obviously, especially second round receivers, we even had no success on. So I'm like, all right, we'll see what happens. Like I do like him, and I think he'll be a good receiver, but he might just be like maybe like Corey Davis was before this past year. Whereas Elijah Moore, I really think he could be a Pro Bowl in the first couple seasons of his career and be a really good player for this team for a long time. So I think he is the most talented. Now we'll see if he can back me up here on the field in a couple months. But I'm really excited about him.
George, we were on the Play Like a Jet U Stadium draft show before it all kicked off that Friday morning for me, Thursday night for you guys over in the States. And we were talking about how there was a lot of overlap between the Browns, the Jets, and the Colts, all picking in a very similar range in the first round. Some of our targets at corner with Greg Newsome, Tevin Jenkins, for us, Elijah Vera Tucker. How did you feel about, first of all, the Colts and where they ended up double dipping at edge? And what did you think of the Jets' move to trade up for Elijah Vera Tucker? Probably not on your radar. Obviously, he was a better fit at guard. He probably wasn't going to play left tackle for you guys. But what did you think about, number one, how you guys went with Kwity Paye and then double dipping and also with AVT for the Jets?
Yeah, I think Vera Tucker is a guy that Ballard liked. Obviously, wasn't a left tackle kind of fit, but I think he's a lineman that fits sort of what the Colts look for. So I think he wasn't probably going to be a guy they would have drafted this year. You never know. I mean, with Ballard, he's not afraid to kind of pull the trigger on something that doesn't initially, make headlines or get everybody excited. And that's what happened in the draft. I mean, Kwity Paye, people were really excited. Here's a guy, a pass rusher they need. He's going to come in and start at right defensive end right away, which hardly ever happens here. I mean, I think Darius Leonard's about the last one I can remember that they drafted. And it's not that they don't start right away, that there's no competition, that it's his job the day he's drafted. There's rookies that start, obviously, but I don't think there's no question that Kwity Paye is going to be a starter for this team day one. And I think it was a need. It was either going to be a left tackle there, it was going to be a defensive end, and the tackles were all off the board pretty much at the time the Colts came up. So the second round pick was a shocker. A lot of people were really surprised, not just because it's a double dip, but because the Dangbo's hurt. And we don't know when he's going to play this year, if he's going to play this year. But I will say they are extremely high on him. And since the draft, the logic of it makes a lot of sense. They think they've got Mathis and Freeney for their future. In their mind, they've got their bookend pass rushers. We'll see how that works. But they really thought Odangbo was a first-round guy who fell because of the injury. And I think they feel like if he's got a red shirt for a year, so be it. That they have that much faith in him. I've not heard Ballard be this excited about a second-round pick since Leonard. So that's kind of piqued my interest. We'll see. I mean, this time of year, it's always easy. All the draft picks are going to work out. They're all going to be amazing. But I think it wasn't on paper. It wasn't what you thought going in. I mean, as soon as they picked Kwity Paye, the thought process is the tackle's coming in the second round. It was just a natural way of thinking. It didn't happen, especially with not having a third-round pick this year. I think it was a real shock. But when you look at it, they felt like the value on Odangbo was so high that they just couldn't pass. And we'll see. That'll be borne out. I think Douglas is similar too. From obviously, you guys have a lot more experience with him. But it just seems like one of Ballard's whole things, I don't have to be right on draft day. I have to be right 3 years later. It'll prove itself out. And I think Odangbo is exhibit A of that right now.
Let's stay on the draft for a little bit, because as we mentioned on the top, the Jets and Colts have an annual deal going in April. Every single year they make a trade. In 2018, we had the move for Sam Darnold up to 3, which at the time I didn't think was a terrible move for the Jets. It obviously worked out fantastically well for the Colts and the players they selected with those picks. Little deals like Nate Hairston, Quincy Wilson. We haven't had one this year. So I wanted to do a fun little exercise. And Clay, I want to start with you. Let's say we can protect 3 players in our roster. I went to the liberty of protecting George's players for him for the Colts. Let's say you can't touch Darius Leonard, you can't touch Quentin Nelson, and you can't touch DeForest Buckner. Who would you trade for to get on this Jets roster if you could take one other guy from the Colts?
Oh, man. That's That's a tough one. Actually, no, probably not. Granted, it's not a position that it's definitely a position of need, but it's not the most important position. You can argue it's the least important position, but I'm going to go Jonathan Taylor. I mean, getting a running back like him, granted, it was only 1 year, and we've seen running backs have an amazing rookie year and then fall off the face of the earth in year 2. But I don't think Jonathan Taylor is going to be that type of back. I think he's going to be a really good player in this league for at least a first contract. And yeah, I think I would put him in that backfield with the Jets. And team him up with Michael Carter, and you can kind of have that UNC backfield again, where it's the thunder and lightning. But Jonathan Taylor, he kind of has both. He's thunder and lightning in one. So, so I'd probably go with Taylor if you're taking those 3 away from me and just looking at the Jets roster, because obviously we only have Michael Carter, Tevin Coleman, Michael Pirine, and then going through the rest of the Colts roster. I mean, maybe Ryan Kelly. Because McGovern was okay. Maybe Rodrigo Blankenship. The dire need of a kicker. But no, I'd probably go with Jonathan Taylor, even though running back is very far down on my list of importance.
Yeah, see, I left Smith off my list as well because I figured, look, he's a really good player. The Jets don't need a right tackle, but also he'd be someone that would be protected.
Yeah.
Some names that I thought would be interesting. I agree. I thought Ryan Kelly was someone I thought about. He's not an elite player, but he's a really good football player. This probably might sound strange to Colts fans, but even Mark Lewinsky, who the Jets have been so bad at right guard for the last 5 years, it's been horrendous. He's at least been an above average right guard. It's not a very crucial position. He's probably not the best player, but just a position of need and how important it is in that weakest link. I thought about Kwity Paye, even though he's a rookie, just what he can bring to the edge opposite Carl Lawson. So there were some of the names I thought about. George, what about if we flip it? You can't take Mekhi Becton, Quinnen Williams, or Zach Wilson. Where would you go on this Jets roster, which is a little more barren than the Indy one?
No, it's funny because it's probably not anyone the Jets fans would even necessarily think about. But to me, outside of the edge rush position, which you talked about earlier, I think that's where the lack of a veteran there is really telling. The third cornerback spot's going to be really interesting here this year because they feel good with Xavier Rhodes. They feel really good with Kenny Moore. After that, you got a lot of guys competing, and I would look at Bryce Hall just because of what might happen, with him down the road. I'd take him right now over Rocky Sin, who's kind of the leader in the clubhouse, to be that third corner here. They've got a lot of competition there, and so looking at the roster, that's probably the way I would go.
It's interesting, Clay, because as a Jets fan, I love Bryce Hall. I really liked him coming out of Virginia, had him as a 2nd or 3rd round pick, if not for the leg injury. It's kind of odd to hear non-Jets fans actually give him some credit, right, Clay?
Yeah, I mean, we're all optimistic about him. I mean, because if we got him in the 5th round, he probably would have been a 2nd round pick if not for that leg injury his last year at Virginia. And he came back in the middle of 2020. Played pretty well. I mean, obviously he has some rookie bumps. That's going to happen at cornerback, maybe more so than any other position outside of quarterback. So there is optimism there. And yeah, I think you're right. I don't think Jets fans would be like, oh no, you can't take Bryce Hall. But I think that would be a good pickup for them. I mean, and you actually brought up a name. Kenny Moore is probably someone I would think about trading for this team too, just because, just like you said, the lack of veteran leadership at the edge position for the Colts, same thing with the Jets cornerback position. Their oldest cornerback that isn't a special teamer is Bless Austin, and he's going into year 3. So I think I'd probably trade maybe Kenny Moore.
This is the official Michael Carter II show, so I don't think we can have any Kenny Moore talk over here. Okay, Clay, so let's just be very careful.
Michael, we want you on.
Let's talk a little bit now about the outlook for these two teams in 2021. Probably a little bit different end of the spectrum, but George, starting with the Jets, our win total is 6.5, which seems pretty fair, I think, for where they were as a 2-win team, adding some nice talent. If you had to go one way or the other, do you think over, under, or right about that 6.5 mark?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's so hard is I'm not sure how the rest of the division is going to shake out. I mean, Buffalo's Buffalo, and we know, which is weird. I mean, it's weird to even say Buffalo's the top dog. I'm still trying to get used to that. But like, what's New England going to be this year? I mean, are they back? Are they more like they were last year? Are they sliding down? I have no idea. Miami seems like to be an enigma almost every year. They don't have Fitzmagic anymore. How's that going to play out? I don't know. I would say if ever it. I mean, it's the cop-out, but it really depends on how quickly Zach Wilson comes along. if he's the number 2 pick in the draft, if he's that guy, I'd say over. If it takes him a little while longer than to get his feet under him, then probably under. That's cheating. I mean, it's completely being on the fence. But I feel like so much rides on who Zach Wilson becomes this year.
Clay, look, we've discussed this already. I think we both ended up with 8 wins, which was somehow very optimistic, which is unusual for Jets fans. But after a couple of weeks of dead time in the offseason and collecting your thoughts, are you still just leaning towards over for the Jets?
I think so. I think obviously so much depends on injuries, and like George said, Zach Wilson. I mean, we all expect him to be pretty good, but how good is he going to be in year one? So I think they'll end up with 7 or 8 wins. I do think they'll be below 500. Well, it's not like there is a 500 anymore, but but yeah, I think they'll end up with 7 and 8 wins and just get over that 6.5 mark.
George, shifting now to the Colts, the biggest news in the AFC South has been Julio Jones, and Clay and I discussed it on the show many weeks ago now when he was a topic of discussion. Working so closely with the Colts, do you think he was ever an option for this front office? And how much do you think the impact of him on Tennessee has on this division? Do you think it's shifted who the favorite is? Are the Colts still the favorite? How much did Julio Jones impact the South?
Yeah, I think it's huge. I think when you look at what they had already with Derrick Henry, and then you've got A.J. Brown out there, Tannehill doesn't have to really be great to have good numbers. And, I think especially losing Arthur Smith, I thought when that happened, okay, this is going to be interesting because that offense changed under him significantly, and give a lot of credit to Tannehill. But I felt like Arthur Smith was a big part of what they were doing over there. Having him move on, you're thinking, okay, maybe they take a step back and then they go and get Julio Jones, ironically from his new team. And now all of a sudden, I don't know how you defend the Titans if everything's working. Obviously you've got to be aware of Henry. You've got to be aware of A.J. Brown. And now you've got Julio Jones out there who, if he's healthy, is absolute game breaker, every week. I don't think it was ever a realistic option for Indianapolis for the reasons I talked about earlier. And the cap situation here looks good on paper, but they know there are bills coming due. They know that Quentin Nelson is going to cost a significant amount more money probably next year. Darius Leonard and Braden Smith this year. And so I don't think they could take on that kind of commitment. Obviously, just from a pure football standpoint, it would have made a lot of sense. You want to get Carson Wentz back and healthy, give him Julio Jones. But I think they feel like, obviously Michael Pittman is not Julio Jones, won't be expected to be Julio Jones, but I think they feel like they can get some things from him. And then you get maybe a healthy Paris Campbell, which is wishful thinking at this point. And that offense could rev up a little bit. I think Tennessee's a favorite in the division for the simple fact that they won it. I know that's a really easy thing to say, but they came into Indianapolis in November last year, and yes, Autry was out and Buckner was out, and that makes a big difference, but they dominated that football game. And so I think the Colts have to go out and improve it. Both teams won on the other team's field last year. I think it's going to be a year-long battle at the top of the division, but to me, until the Colts go out and prove otherwise, it's Tennessee's division.
Clay, when we discussed over-unders a few weeks ago, I actually went under for Tennessee, talking about pending the Julio Jones trade. Obviously, that changes the dynamic, but I thought they were having a really poor offseason, to be honest. Mm-hmm. As George just mentioned, losing Arthur Smith, they let go of Jonnu Smith. Their second receiver, we couldn't even name him. Like, we had no idea who that guy was. So seeing how far Julio Jones takes them, do you agree with George that they're now the favorite and likely to go over 9 wins?
I still like Indianapolis. I understand what George is saying. Like you want to see it before you believe it, kind of thing. But losing Arthur Smith may be just huge for that team, where like Ryan Tannehill kind of goes back to what he was. Yeah, obviously you got a 3-headed monster with Derrick Henry, Julio Jones, and A.J. Brown. But all right, now that I finally have the depth chart up, I can actually talk about it a little bit. But their defense is still like very iffy. They don't really have an edge presence. They have Harold Landry, who flashes every now and again, but he's dealt with some injuries. Bud Dupree, he's coming off a big injury, so we'll see what he can even bring to this defense this year. Jeffrey Simmons is good. Autry, actually, they got him from Indianapolis. I didn't even know about that signing, but. Yeah, their secondary is very bland. And Caleb Farley, I hope that he can stay on the field. I hope he doesn't deal with any injuries. But Janoris Jenkins, Dane Cruikshank, I hope I said that right. Breon Borders, nothing really stands out to that defense. And I know they were the worst third down defense in the league. And you can't be a very good team in this league if you're terrible on third down defense. That's just not how it works. Unless you have unless you have a top 3 offense, you are not going to be a very good team if your defense is that porous on third downs, which they were last year. And they're going to have to prove that they're not. And I think that's the biggest question. They're going to have to prove that they actually improved on third downs this year and can actually live without Arthur Smith. So I'm still going to say Indianapolis is the favorite. I think Carson Wentz, I think he will improve from last year. And I hope he's an improvement. Yeah. I hope he's an improvement on Phillip Rivers too. And I just like that team. I like what they're building there. And no, they're not Super Bowl contenders yet. I don't think anyone in that division is, but I do think that the Colts should take the division.
I know this is a Jets show, but I find the Colts a really fascinating team. So I want to go a little bit further into it and talking about Carson Wentz, because I was someone who thought, number one, he was the MVP before he hurt his knee back in 2017, I think it was. I loved his play in 2019. He carried that Philly team down the stretch against Washington and the Giants. I get they're not great teams, but who was he throwing the ball to? I think it was Zach Ertz and nobody else. And he was throwing balls against Washington to the corner of the end zone, and then obviously fell off last year once the pressure was there. But I think what I know about Carson Wentz is when he's kept upright in a clean pocket and he's able to throw from favorable positions, which Indy's going to provide for him. Now they get Fisher at left tackle. He's going to be an improvement on not just what he did last year, but on Phillip Rivers. So what's the thought process for Colts fans? Because I don't know a lot of Colts fans, George. Where are they at with Carson Wentz, and what are the expectations like for him?
Yeah, they're nervous. I think one thing around here right now is that because of the Andrew Luck saga, the idea was you had Peyton Manning, you're going to go seamlessly into the Andrew Luck era, and it's just going to take off like a rocket. And obviously that didn't happen. And I think the rebuilding process, which Jets fans aren't going to hear this because they'll laugh at the Colts fans for it, but the rebuilding process for them, it has gone on long enough. Like they expected to have what Green Bay had with Aaron Rodgers, and it just did not happen. There were 3 really good years with Luck, and then the shoulder happened. And, when you lose your starting quarterback, not just 2 weeks before the regular season, but coming off the year they came off of. I mean, you went 9-1 in the last 10 games. The thought process at that time is it's all coming together. You got the right head coach. The general manager's doing his job. They are ready to go. And Andrew Luck retires, and it was – I can't even explain it. It was the weirdest moment I've ever had in a press box, I'll tell you that. You're in the third quarter of an absolutely unimportant preseason game, and the news breaks. There were – my wife takes photos for us, for the paper, and she's down on the sideline. There were fans asking players on the sideline, is it true? And Luck is on the sideline at that time. He's down, down the way a little bit. So that to me is the biggest thing. No one, any fan base wants to hear patience ever. I mean, it doesn't exist, right? But that to me is the biggest thing with Ballard and Reich, what they've had to deal with going through. When Ballard got here, Luck's out for the whole year. When Wright gets here, we didn't know until I think late May, maybe even into training camp, whether or not Andrew Luck was going to play that first year. And then you go through, that whole situation, lose him, kind of make it through 2019 one way or another. To bounce back last year and make the playoffs, to me, it's a testament of the leadership of this team, and that's why I think there is optimism going forward, and that's why I think the Carson Wentz situation is so interesting. He's not Andrew Luck. I'm not going to insult Andrew Luck and say that, but there are things Carson Wentz does that are similar to a poor man's Andrew Luck. If that makes sense. His mobility, his ability to extend plays at times, bad things too, like forcing plays and throwing into double or triple coverage, but I think that's something that, if you could, for a roadmap for Frank Reich, if there is such a thing when Luck retired, this to me in many ways is the best possible scenario for him. So, well, Andrew Luck's going to retire, but 2 years later, you're going to get your old guy. You're going to get the guy you had playing at an MVP level. Yeah. And that's where the optimism is here. Ballard brought up, it's interesting you mentioned that 2019 season. He brought that up specifically, the finish to that year. That's what sort of sold him. Obviously, Frank Reich standing on the table saying, this is our guy. But when Ballard went back and looked at the end of that 2019 season, that's not ancient history. And to see him play Greg Ward, that was the top receiver at that time. To see him do that, I think that's what Ballard was most impressed by. He can elevate at times the guys around him. Now, what's going to be interesting is how he responds after an unprecedentedly bad season. I don't know if we've ever seen a guy that young who had played at the heights that he played to get that poor. Everything so far is right. Everything, look, he hasn't been sacked. He hasn't thrown an interception. They haven't lost a game. There's a lot of things that are going to test this. But he did the right things in the spring in terms of making contact with guys, getting to know them as people. Every player in the spring said, look, he's not just asking about football. He wants to know about my family. He wants to know about me. I think that was important because there were rumors in Philly. He didn't really connect with guys. Well, he's trying to do a better job of that. I think the most important thing we've seen for him so far, one, working out with the guys in Texas on his own. You also want to see your quarterback do that. But two, he's working with, I always pronounce the name right. I think it's Adam Dedeaux. It's one of the throwing gurus, one of the baseball pitching guys, rebuilding his mechanics from the ground up. And I think, to me, at least the commitment's there. We don't know what's going to happen. None of us do. If we did, we get rich, with a crystal ball here and make predictions and, get in a much better financial situation than we are now, I'm sure. But realistically, that's all you can ask from at this point. He's made the commitment. He's made the effort. We'll see what happens. Frank Reich theoretically knows what it looks like when it's right. So maybe he gets him back to that point. But I think that's where the optimism comes from. Wentz so far doing all the right things. Reich has a history with him. Look, Rivers wasn't a Pro Bowler last year. I'm not sure he was a top 16 guy last year. But he played better than he played the year before at the Chargers, and he played well enough to get the team in the playoffs. And I think that the thought process is, if Wright can do that with a 38-year-old Rivers, what can he do with a 28, 29-year-old Wentz? So we'll see.
And we won't have too long to find out the answers to these questions. We are getting extremely close to camps and preseason games, which I actually missed last year on reflection. And we're getting very close to proper football. I can't wait for it. George, thanks so much for coming on today. For Jets fans, it's our last Wednesday show without training camp. We have practice starting next Wednesday. Tell everyone a little bit about where they can find you on Twitter and where they can find all your work that you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on Twitter at GM Bremer, and HaroldBolton.com is where we'll have pretty much wall-to-wall Colts coverage starting next week.
Clay, 1 week away from football. Well, from training camp. Pads. Nearly there. Can't wait for it, guys. Really appreciate everyone watching with us again at Play Like a Jet Live with U Stadium. Make sure you're checking out the rest of their shows on the U Stadium YouTube, on their Twitter. Make sure you're checking out everything we're doing over on our YouTube and with the main podcast with Scott Mason. Had a really good episode with Evan Roberts yesterday. Scott is the guru. I know, George, you know Scott really well. Does a great job. So make sure you're checking out all our work. Make sure you're checking out George's at the Herald Bulletin. And we'll see you next week, Wednesday night, 7:15 p.m. Eastern.